All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Decisions webinar today on mobile forms and Decisions version 7. Glad that you could be here to attend this webinar with us today. All right. For those of you that are new to Decisions, we are a business process management software that helps people to easily automate and optimize business processes without the need to code. On this slide is an example of some of our current customers in different sectors that'll help give you a good idea of where Decision fits. We're equal parts a rules engine and a workflow tool. So there's a lot of different problems that we can solve across many different industries. For those of you that are new to Decisions, or maybe even those of you that have been with us for a while, these are some upcoming events that I think you might find of interest. We got some certification going on here in March, along with some beginner and advanced training. Please note that one is in British summertime to help our folks who might be over in Europe. And then on the next slide, you'll see that we have some examples or some upcoming events, I should say, of another webinar to help people understand how we can integrate with Salesforce. And again, for those who might be looking for just some additional training or to get even more familiar with Decisions, maybe you're not a Decisions customer yet, but you'd like to understand what we do in a little bit more depth, there is some beginner training that's going to be available in April.
And as always, you can sign up for any one of these events at decisions.com/events.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. So with that being said, you just heard from Jessica, who's one of our senior sales engineers who has been with Decisions for quite some time. And I appreciate her piping in, and I forgot to mention where you can go find that information. But she's really good, and she'll be doing most of the driving today. My name is Robert Young, and I'm on the sales engineering team as well, and I'll be available to help answer any questions that you may have. So on our agenda today, we're going to look at a couple of items. First off is a new feature that's available in version 7 called Simple Forms. This is a new way that we've helped try to accelerate the design of forms within Decisions. Jessica is going to cover responsive containers and talk a little bit about how you can use different container types in different applications, and then go on to actually designing forms for specific devices. This is an area where we'll get into building forms for things like maybe mobile phones like iPhones or Android devices, or maybe you're targeting a particular tablet type of a device and you want to have a specific form type for those. And then finally, we'll go over using the new Decisions app that's going to be available in version 7 as well. Jessica will give you a quick preview of that so you can see how we'll be able to use any of these types of forms on the native app that'll give you native functionality within your mobile devices. So with that being said, I should say after that, we'll have a little time for Q&A. But if you have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A bar as we go along. But with that being said, I will hand it over to Jessica.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. And speaking of Q&A and questions, if everyone could just take a moment to look at their Zoom panel, it should look just like the picture on the slide. You'll be able to chat with Decisions team members utilizing the chat feature. Or if you utilize the raise your hand function, someone on our team will reach out to you during the webinar. And of course, as always, you can use the Q&A feature for questions as well. Now, finally, I want to point out the polls feature. Some of you have already answered some of those polls, but I am about to share another poll. So please take a couple of moments to go ahead and locate that button and answer some of those questions. So bear with me one moment here. I'm going to go ahead and launch that second poll. There we go. All right, so on to the first item on our agenda. That's going to be simple forms. And simple forms were introduced in version 7, as Robert mentioned. And these are designed to give people who are new to the form designer an easy way to build more modern looking forms that are also mobile friendly. Because again, in version 7, we did also introduce that native mobile client, and we will be exploring that a little later in this webinar. But simple forms have a new set of controls called composite controls, and these are based entirely on the Material UI specification. And what that means is when you add a control, such as a text box, that control is going to be a combination of the data entry element and the label. And that's also going to include that natural dynamic method of shifting the label over top of the control. So when designing these forms, the controls are going to automatically stack in a vertical panel without a grid. And why this is important is it allows those users or those designers building those forms to only focus on the data that needs to be captured, rather than spending a lot of time up front setting up grids and the layout of the forms, trying to figure out where to place labels and where those corresponding data capture controls should be placed. Additionally, a lot of times what happens in that paradigm is you do all the work on the layout to create the area where you want all the content, all the data entry for your user to interact with, and then you're left with a little area to figure out where to put buttons. So we looked at a lot of other form designers to see why is it easier for them. And the reason it's easier for other people, if you look at something like something as simple as Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, the reason is they don't have outcomes. You can't approve, reject, or send a thing back. You can either save or cancel. That's it. 2 things, period. And we thought, well, we want to allow people to have completely dynamic outcomes to drive data through a workflow that's sensible, but what if they do just need a save and control? So now what we have is the capability on simple forms that allows you to simply check a checkbox and boom, you have a fixed panel button with 2 set buttons without having to work that into your layout. So what does all this mean for you? Simple, no pun intended. This is going to allow you to get forms quickly out the door and ready to use. So rather than spending any more time on the slide talking about it, let's actually dive into the product and let's build a simple form together. I'm going to go ahead and open up my version 7 here, and I'm going to dive right into creating that form. So as always in Decisions, when you're in the Designer Studio, you're going to have a series of buttons across the top that are going to allow you to start building. And I'm going to select Create Form. And if I scroll down a little bit, actually right underneath of the normal form, we have our Simple Form category. So I'll go ahead and select Simple Form. I'll select it again, and maybe we'll name this our PTO request form. When I hit create, this is going to take us into the Simple Form Designer. Now, one thing to note with the Simple Form Designer is you are going to have a little bit more limited controls here. And again, that's because these controls are designed to work compositely, meaning it has that data entry and that label included. But the design experience is going to be really simple. So to actually start building, I'm just going to pick the component that I want to work with. I'll just select my text box. I'll just drag it right over onto the simple form. I can set my data name here. So we'll call this maybe requester name. And when I hit enter, I don't even have to add a label. It's already been added. And we'll show you exactly what it looks like when you're actually interacting with this form, with that request name kind of shifting up when users go to enter it. Now, the next thing I'm going to add on my form is maybe a dropdown so that user can select what type of PTO they're requesting or paid time off. So I'm just going to come over to my combo box, also known as a dropdown. And again, I'm just going to drag it right here onto the form designer. And those controls are going to start stacking on top of each other. And we're going to call this our type of request. Now, there's a few properties I need to configure here, but as everything in Decisions, it's click to configure, it's no code. And what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to say, I want to display a list of strings in this dropdown. I want it to be a static list of items. And I already have a list over here on another screen that I'm going to copy and paste so that I don't put you through watching me try and spell bereavement because it's not pretty. And here, now that I've added this list of items, these will be available in the dropdown. Now, the next component we're going to add, maybe we need a start date. So again, I'm going to just find my date picker, drag it on over. This form is going to start expanding to fit those different components. You'll notice it actually added it in between our request name and our type of request, but that's okay. All I have to do is just slide it right below that. So you can just slide these controls exactly where you want them. Now I'll go ahead and give this a name. This is going to be our start time, or our start date rather. There we go. I'll grab another one more date picker here. And we'll call this our return date. Now here, it didn't pick up my start time, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and, or my start date, that's okay. I'll just paste it right over here. There we go. All right, so now that I have the actual data that I'm looking to capture, typically what you would find in the form designer is now I need to start thinking about, okay, where am I going to put those buttons? Well, as I mentioned before, it's simply just a checkbox that's going to allow you to add that. So I'm going to navigate over to my properties panel on the right-hand side here. And at the very bottom, I have the show button panel. And when I select it, there we go, boom, it's added my okay, it's added my cancel, and my form's done. My form's ready, it's ready to be used, ready to get out the door. So let's go ahead and save this and take a look at what this looks like running. And again, because of the simplicity of this and because of kind of the sleek styling here, these are mobile-friendly forms as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and now that I've saved it, we'll close out and let's run this simple form. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to run it. Because I have my cursor in this request name, you can see that that label has shifted up. But if I come down here to start date and I select that, you'll notice the start date is going to shift up. So again, I think that's a really cool feature. I think it's really slick and a lot more modernized. But I won't spend any more time filling out this form. It's not actually going to go anywhere. But I just wanted to show you, in a couple of minutes, we were able to drag some components on there of data that we needed to capture. We didn't have to think about the layout. We didn't have to think about where are those buttons going to go. And again, within a couple minutes, or not even a couple minutes, I was able to create a form that can now be used on a desktop and a mobile device. Now this simple form, this isn't designed specifically for mobile devices. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a couple of examples of how you can design forms specifically for those mobile devices. So I'm going to jump back to my slides here. And before we jump into that, the reason that I have this slide is there is a lot of people on this webinar who understand the word responsive in today's day and age has very specific meaning, especially if you come from a development background or are in that developer community. A lot of it originates with responsive.js, just a JavaScript library that was meant to empower HTML designers and HTML implementers to create forms that could work equally well on a desktop or on a mobile device. So responsive.js ushered in an era where forms would ultimately change their layout and change aspects of their look and feel as the form was being resized. Now, whether or not it was being resized because you were connecting via iPhone or you were connecting via a desktop, or maybe you were just making your window really small on your desktop and moving it down to a corner so you could enter data on the form at the same time or something like that. Now with responsive.js, there is a lot it does. It can not only take form controls and reposition them in a completely dynamic way. So what I mean by that is maybe moving them from being side by side to be top to bottom. But it could also say, oh, I have become very small. Now I can no longer show you a full calendar of dates you want to travel. I now need to show you a little text box where it suggests you enter a date. So forms can not only change where they're positioned, but they can change their characters entirely. So today, what we'd like to do is we'd like to look at two features and decisions that give you this flexibility by using our drag and drop. What you see is what you get Form Designer without having to need to know how to code or how to use those JS libraries. And the first way we'll be talking about is making a form quote unquote responsive. That's on the left-hand side of my screen. And what I'm talking about here, what I'm talking about here is using the option to create alternate views of forms for a mobile device and desktop. meaning if a form needs to be shown on an iPhone and can't be shown the same way it would be on a desktop, we have a feature that allows you to do this by creating a pixel-perfect exacting mobile experience. Maybe that's even capturing different data. So for example, you can show a calendar on the desktop, but just a text box where you enter a date on a mobile device. And again, along capturing different data, let's say you have an approval for a loan. Well, on a desktop, you can show all the loan data and all the documents they uploaded. You might even show a picture of the person. You can give a lot of different buttons where you might want to interact with the applicant or interact with those underwriters. But on a mobile device, you just want to show the loan amount, the risk score, and 2 buttons to approve or reject so that you can get that action done quickly from a really streamlined experience. And so Decisions has responsive, that's on the left-hand side, that's using facilities and tools built into Decisions that allow you to provide the best possible exacting pixel-perfect experience for a mobile device versus a desktop device. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide, we have the responsive container approach. That is going to allow you to use responsive in the kind of general IT sense of the word responsive these days, where you can build one design that automatically adjusts its layout. Some of the benefits with this paradigm using the responsive container is you're only going to have one form to maintain and edit, not necessarily a form for desktop, a form for a mobile device, and a form for a tablet. And what this means is it's less initial implementation up front, it's less maintenance, and it's quickly and easily adaptable over time. Now, however, you're not going to have as exacting a layout control versus using kind of the left-hand side paradigm. And you're certainly not going to have the same degree of flexibility of displaying different components on different devices. And the reason that we want to show you both of these different responsive paradigms we offer in Decisions is so that your organization can choose which experience is best for your users. And the first paradigm we're going to talk about is actually the paradigm of using the responsive container. So that was the one on the right-hand side of the slide. So we're probably doing this a little backwards, but that's okay. And with the responsive containers, I just have a slide here that has a screenshot of the same exact form, but being displayed on different devices. So what we mean by shifting components around and having the form displayed differently is on the left-hand side, this desktop view, I have my card information section, I have my billing address section, and I have my purchase details section. Now on this side, card information and billing address are side by side. And that's because we have the room on our desktop to display it that way. Now on the right-hand side, where I'm viewing it on a mobile device, it's the same exact form, but now this billing address section has shifted to be below the card information section. And then again, below that, we have the purchase details. And again, this is one single form that's allowing for these different views. So let's jump into Decisions and let's actually see this form that I have on my slides running in Decisions. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just give you guys a very brief overview of how to design responsive containers, just so you have an idea of what it looks like to put it together in these designers. I'm not going to go into full detail here. The reason being is if you're interested, if your organization is interested in taking this approach, we do have another webinar that is dedicated fully to showing you how to set these up. But again, just a high-level overview here. The first thing that I want to point out is the layout of my form. If I look at the properties panel on the right-hand side, the layout of this form, the container type, is responsive. It's not grid, and that's typically what you'll see is that grid layout. So we are using the responsive layout here. Now, once you've set your form to be responsive, what you start doing is dragging grid layouts on top of this responsive layout. And so what I mean by that is, let me go ahead and select this grid. This card information here, it's probably hard to see on your screen, but there is some orange highlighted or orange dotted lines around it. This is just showing the container that's on this responsive layout. Same thing with the billing address. This is going to have a different grid container. Same thing with purchase details. This is a different grid container. And you do have flexibility here in defining some of the settings or specifications for each of these containers. So if I actually go back and select my responsive grid here, when I go to the properties panel, I'm going to have all of these sections on my form. And the first section is that card information section. If I want to start changing some of the settings there, all I have to do is click this little pencil button. And here I can start specifying some of those sizes. What's the minimum width before this needs to be shifted underneath of another component? So here I just have it set to 300. You can set the height of how high you want this grid to be. Or if you want a certain section to take the full width of the form, no matter what, you can just select this. And what I mean by that is this purchase details section. This by default is taking the entire width of that form. So if I open up the purchase details grid section, you can see I've simply just checked that button. I've also made the height a little bit bigger, but just know when you're designing these, again, you have that control over how these different sections are going to shift, what sizes they should be. And one other thing that I'm going to drill in here is, again, this is another drag and drop environment. And I know we already have this built and you just saw me drag some components on, but I just want to show you, it's the same paradigm here. If I need to add a text box, I simply just drag it onto my form and I can configure that information in the properties panel. So no code is needed. One other thing that I'll mention before I run this is you don't have to use our out-of-the-box styling capabilities. If your company has a CSS sheet to conform to your business or your organization's styling, you can very easily apply these to these forms as well. So if you scroll down here, I have the ability to start adding style sheets. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. But before I run it, one last thing, I just want to show you, there's nothing special that I need to do to configure this to run in different views. All I've done is I've added my show form step and I've selected that responsive form that I just showed you. That's it. I don't have to change any of the properties on this step to make it work differently in different environments. It's already set. It's good to go. So let's go ahead and run these from desktop view. And to do that, I'm going to navigate to my workflow catalog on the left-hand side here. I'll click Submit Payment. And here we can see that desktop view. We can see the sections side by side. But what's interesting here is if I start changing the layout or I start changing the size of this, you're going to see that billing address section has gone ahead and dropped down underneath that card information. So that just means that I hit that minimum width and it's time to drop it down. So this is running it from the desktop. And this is me, manually changing this for this to drop down here. But what does it look like if you go ahead and run it from a mobile environment? So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and open up my developer tools here. We're going to run a simulation. I'm going to choose iPhone 10. And let me go ahead and refresh my browser so Decisions picks up that I am in a mobile environment. For those of you who are not familiar with developer tools over here, this is just allowing me to simulate what it would look like on a mobile device. Now, because I am in the mobile device portal now, this is the Decisions mobile device portal. If I go to my workflow catalog, I have that same flow of submit payment. If I select it, we can see it's automatically going to resize. So I didn't have to, change the size of my screen here. This is how it's going to display on those mobile devices. And what's interesting here is if I maybe pick an iPad, we can see that because those iPads are a little bit wider, that billing address is going to shift right back up to the side. Now, if for an iPad, I still wanted it to be card information on top, billing address information underneath that, and purchase details under that, all I would have to do is play with the width settings that I showed you earlier in that form designer. All right, so that is our responsive container kind of form design or form approach. But now what I'd like to shift into is talking about designing forms for specific devices. So again, just as a refresher, this might be if you need to display different components on a form, not just have the form kind of shift around. It's an entirely different form. So one thing to note here is you are going to have to design 2 specific forms. So on this slide, I just have an example on the left-hand side of a form that was built for a desktop environment. And because we have more real estate on a desktop environment, we have more room to do things like add very detailed descriptions or instructions of how this form should be filled out. If I go down to the bottom a little bit, you can see we're designing in the paradigm of having a label on top, and then underneath of that label, we have that text box. So on and so forth for all of these different controls here. Now, on the right-hand side of my screen, this is a form that was designed specifically for a mobile device. And you'll notice it's a little bit different. So rather than using the label control paradigm, what I have here is I have these different controls. So we have a drop down, we have a text box, but we're utilizing something called a watermark feature in Decisions. And that's just going to allow you to display some set of instructions right there on the control itself. So it's going to allow you to have a more compact view. That's going to be a better experience for those users using it from those mobile devices. Now, one other thing that I'll point out here, or one other thing that I will say again regarding CSS and styling, your company might have different standards as far as what CSS should be used on a desktop form versus how something should be styled on a mobile form. So by building these on 2 different forms, you're going to have the ability to have that exact styling that you're looking for. Now, just because you design 2 different forms, it doesn't mean that it's going to be 2 separate steps in Decisions. So here on this slide, this is actually an example of me dragging that payment form right here onto a flow. It's 1 step. It's 1 show form step. But if I look on the right-hand side, this is in the properties panel, and we'll actually build it in just a moment. You have the ability to select, okay, if a desktop is running it, I want this form to run. However, if a mobile device is running, I want a different form. And what you're going to notice is you have 2 different outcome paths. And why that's important is because, as we mentioned before, you might be capturing different data on those different forms. So, for instance, you might need to do a little bit of data manipulation to get the data exactly how you need it before you save it off to a database. You can do that on this mobile submit path. So you can have different logic depending on which device was accessing that form. Now, whereas you're on a desktop device, you've probably designed the form where you don't need to make any data manipulation before you save it off. So just know you have the ability to add different logic on each one of these paths. And again, let's jump into Decisions and let's actually do it. All right. So we have already put together a desktop and a mobile form. I'll go ahead and pop these open just to give you a sneak peek. These are not the same forms that were on the slides. These ones are a little different. And this is a form that Robert actually put together here. And this is just capturing some credit card information and billing address information, maybe to submit for an online payment. And what I want to point out is we are using that paradigm where it looks where we have a label on top, and then we have the control below that. We're not using any watermarks here because we have plenty of room. We have plenty of real estate on our form to add these different components. Another thing I want to point out is for the expiration date, and I want you guys to keep this in mind before we jump to the next form. For the expiration date here, we're actually using a date picker. Now on the mobile form, you'll see we did a little bit different. For state, this is also some free form text here, whereas on the mobile form, we're actually added a drop down. So again, keep in mind that you can design these to have different components on those different forms. Now let's go ahead and take a sneak peek at the mobile payment form. Now again, these are designed very differently, so it's very clear to you guys when we're running it that we are actually using these different forms. Now here in this design paradigm, when I click on it, I can still see name on card, and I can still see this is a text box, but it's not two different form controls because I want to have a very compact view for my user. Now, for those of you who are probably new to decisions, you might not be aware of where that watermark feature is. So I'll go ahead and just point that out. If I go to the properties panel on the right-hand side and I go to view, I have the ability to add whatever watermark I need here. Now, again, I mentioned we have different components for this particular form. So rather than having a date time picker as we did on the desktop device for this mobile form, for the expiration month, we're going to have a drop down where they can select 1 through 12. And then for the expiration year, it's just going to be some free-form text. Now, again, for state, I mentioned this one is a drop down as well. So we've just added all the abbreviations of the state. Maybe for a mobile device, we didn't want them to have to try and type in a full state name, just give them the ability to pick from a drop down. So now that we've seen these forms, what does it look like to put it in a flow and to get that single step to run both forms? I'm going to call this our run form example. I'll hit create. And this is going to take us into our flow designer. And we're not really here to talk about flow designers today, but for those of you who are new to decisions, I just want to mention, our flow designer is another drag and drop environment. No code is required. And what you're seeing is a blank canvas where you can string together maybe different forms, different rules, different steps to build out the logic of your application. Now let's go ahead and find our show form step and add it to our workflow. All I have to do is simply drag and drop that step. So now that I've added that step, the first thing that I need to do is I need to tell this step, okay, what form am I running if it's desktop device, or what form am I running at all? So I'm going to come to the top here and I'm going to choose pick or create form. And one thing that's really cool in decisions is as you're building here, you have the ability to create one from scratch, which we're not going to do because we have already built that form. But we also have the ability to pick those existing forms. So just know that you can reuse any of these forms across multiple applications. Let's go ahead and select our desktop payment form. All right, I'm going to go ahead and ignore those inputs right now. They're not important. We don't need them. And so now this is set up to only run a desktop form. But what about that mobile option? Well, again, I'm going to go back to my properties panel. I'm going to close up my inputs here, close up my outputs, and I'm going to find a section called form setup. When I open that up, you can see it's already added the desktop payment form for my desktop form. We probably should have named that better. That's my fault. But the next thing that we can do here is we can pick, okay, what form are we going to display if a mobile device accesses this flow? So I'm going to say pick mobile form. I'll hit pick again, and we'll find our mobile payment form. There we go. Now we can see that our mobile payment form has been added. If we had designed a tablet form, we can also do that as well. And what you're seeing here is both of those outcome paths. So as I mentioned before, maybe on the mobile form, we might need to merge some text here. I'm not actually going to do it, but maybe I'll just use a placeholder just to show you. Maybe we need to merge that expiration date and that expiration month, or I'm sorry, that expiration month and that expiration year. Maybe we need to merge that as a single data element before we tie it into the database or save it off to the database. Whereas on the submit path, we're good to go. We already know it's in that date time format. So again, I'll just drag both of these over here to the end step. And let's run this. So we're going to run it from both views. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And before I can run it from both views, I'm going to add it to our workflow catalog. Again, that's just going to allow us to kick off those flows from a nice little folder up top here. And to add it to my workflow catalog, I simply just have to right click on that flow. I'll hover over edit, and I'm going to say publish to workflow catalog. Now, one thing that's really important to note here is when you're publishing these flows to a workflow catalog, if you want users to be able to run them from a mobile device, from that mobile portal, you have to make sure you check show on mobile. So I'll go ahead and check that. And we'll just put this in our default catalog. We'll leave the name alone. If I wanted to change it, I could change it to anything I want, but we'll go ahead and leave that flow name there. So I'll go ahead and publish it. And we can see in our workflow catalog, I now have this run form example. So I'm going to go ahead and select run form example. And we can see right here that it's going to display that desktop form that was designed by Robert, where we can have that date time picker for the expiration date, where we can fill in the state that we want. But what happens when I now put this into a mobile experience and run that same workflow? So again, I'm going to open my developer tools. And we're going to make sure we're using an iPhone 10. Perfect. And I'm just going to refresh my browser here again, just to send it into the mobile experience. And one thing I want to make clear here, what you're seeing, this is not the new mobile application that we're about to talk about. This is the mobile browser experience that we've always offered. But I'll go ahead, I'll open this Start Workflow Catalog. I'll go under Default, and I'll say Run Form Example. And because I'm running this from an iPhone 10, I'm now going to have that mobile form being displayed. And that's how easy it is to actually, with one step, with one flow, be able to run these pixel perfect forms for each of your devices. Now, again, depending on your organization, depending on your use case, depending on your style guides, you might find that this paradigm is best for your organization, or you might find that using the responsive grids is better for your organization. One form that you have to edit and maintain over time. You really have to think about what's more important. Is it having that pixel perfect experience, or is it only having to maintain one form? And that's something that I can't answer for you. That's something that your organization needs to talk about and discuss. And of course, we're always happy to discuss that with you as well. Right. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to our decisions application. So when I say decisions app, I don't mean that mobile browser experience that you just saw. What I mean is new in version 7 is the Decisions native mobile client. And again, I just want to make that distinction here. This is different than that capability to access the Decisions mobile portal via a browser that we've always had. Now, this new feature is going to allow users to download the Decisions app from the Apple or Android store and run forms from within that native client. Now, here on the slide, I have a few screenshots of what the app looks like, along with what a form running on that app looks like. One thing that I'll point out before we dive into the live demonstration is you'll notice that when I'm interacting with the forms, is you're going to have the ability to use your phone's native capabilities, such as the number pad or the date time picker. Another really important thing that we have added here is the ability to have offline forms. So, you might have someone out in the field who doesn't have internet access, but still needs to be able to fill in information. They still need to be able to get their work done while they're offline. But with offline forms, what's cool is they can fill in that information while they're out in the field. But as soon as that device connects to the internet, that data that they filled out is then going to get pushed into decisions and into the workflows for processing. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share my phone. So bear with me one moment here while I get that going. If I can find the right screen on my phone. All right, awesome, awesome. All right, so what I have on my phone here is I have that Decisions app that's been downloaded for the store. And once you've downloaded it from the store, the only thing that you need to do to get this set up is you need to provide the URL to your Decisions instance along with your login information. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I've already provided the URL to my instance along with my login information. And the first thing that I'm going to see is the workflows that I have available to me on the mobile device. And just note that, again, it is important that you have to check that it can be run on a mobile device. Another thing that's important to note here is there is another setting that you have to check. Again, it's just a little checkbox that says allow this form to work offline. But again, once you have those checked, you can simply come to your application, open it up, and I'm just going to click Submit Request. Now, when I open this up, this is going to take me to a form that was built in Decisions, but it's rendering it with my form's native capabilities. So I can actually use my own text pad here. I'll put in an email address for myself. Maybe I would like to request, I'll get crazy with it today, some new 4K monitors. Maybe I need 3 of them. And what you're seeing here is my phone's number box. So these are my phone's number pad. So this might look a little bit different for those iPhone users. I am an Android user. And then again, I'm going to have my phone's date picker. So I'll go ahead and select that. And I also have the ability to have toggles as well, toggle buttons. So maybe I'll mark this as a priority. I know I'm not giving them much time to get it to me here, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and hit done. And I can see that that form, it popped up really quickly on the bottom there, but it said form submitted successfully. Now, what I've actually done as well is I've actually assigned this to myself to approve. And so what I can do is right here from our app, I can go to assignments. I can see here is the request for the new 4K monitors. I'll go ahead and open this up. I can say work assignment. I can see all of the information that was entered on that previous form, and I can approve or reject it. There we go, and it's cleared right out of my inbox. So again, let me move this out of the way. From the Decisions app, you have the ability to kick off these workflows. You work your assignments, and then as well as have access to any other information that you've added to the portal. So with that being said, and us showing you this application, let me go ahead and stop sharing this screen. What I'd love to do is leave plenty of time for Q&A. I'm sure we've had a few come in during the presentation. So let me go back and share the proper screen here. And let's see if we have any that haven't been answered. I know Tim Stahl is on the line, and he is also very diligent about answering people's questions. And it looks like, Tim, you have already answered some of these. So maybe what I'll do is I will read out some of these answers for those of you who might not have seen the questions. Is V7 available to the public now? Great question, Alex. And the answer is yes, you can access it on our website. And I see Tim has provided that link for you. Daniel, so good to see you here on this webinar. I miss you, man. If we have labels that display dynamic messaging, will the height of the label scale with these simple forms? For example, will long messages will push other form controls down appropriately and not get cut off? Currently, this is something that we are working on. Simple forms is something that we are actively developing to fully refine that. So that is coming. Can you change the text or verbiage on the 2 buttons on a simple form? Now, on the 2 default buttons on that panel, they are static to OK and cancel. However, if you don't want to, and this is a great question because this is something I should have addressed when I was showing it to you. However, you can add regular buttons to that form that can be labeled in any way you want. So maybe just to show you that, I did use the form component. I'm sorry, the button component. Let me go ahead and get back into our regular view here. attempt to get back into the regular view here. Maybe not. Let me try from another tab. Here we go. I'll open up that simple form. And as Tim was mentioning, we do still have that button option. So if I wanted to add this button on my form, I can add any button that I need, and I can give it any outcome name. So really that button panel that we've added, that was really just designed for those scenarios where it is a yes or no or a save cancel type situation. But as always, we do provide the ability to have those dynamic outcome paths. Great questions, guys. All right, let's see. Can these workflows be embedded in third-party apps or websites? Yes, absolutely. You can embed both the designers and runtime experience of decisions within websites or apps via an iframe. And it looks like Corey has provided some great documentation there as well. So I see we have a couple of other questions that have come in. Do we have a date for the detailed webinar for building mobile forms? Are you talking about, Nampa, are you talking about the responsive form webinar that I mentioned? We'll kind of move on while we wait for that answer to come in. How difficult is it to install V7 compared to V6? Corey or Tim, I know you guys have a little bit more experience with that. Based on my installing experience, I didn't notice a difference, but I will refer to Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. The version 7 is just as easy to install as 6. There are a couple other options that are available in the installer because of the way it runs now, but it is the same installer you're used to using. It'll just actually push out V7 instead of version 6.
Awesome. On simple forms, do the components have to be the full width? If you are using the vertical stack layout, like by default, where you want the ability to easily slide these around, no, you do not have control over if they're going to be full width or not. However, we don't limit you to just the vertical stack on these simple forms. If you'd still like to go with a grid layout, you can absolutely do that and have a little bit more control as well. Nampa, so yes, you were talking about the responsive grids webinar that I mentioned. That is actually already recorded and on our website, and I can send you the link to that as soon as this webinar is over. Jeffrey, for the mobile app, does the decisions installation have to be hosted or will it work with on-premise? Tim, Corey, anyone?
Yeah. I can take that. So it does work either way. You do have to have version 7. That is the requirement, but you can have it where we're hosting it or it's on premise. You do just, obviously have to have access to it. So whether that's your mobile device having a VPN connection into your network or that installation being accessible to the world.
Awesome. And while we're answering some of these last questions here, I'm going to go ahead and throw up our last poll. Well, I'm not going to physically throw it up. I will throw it onto the screen. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple of moments to answer those 2 questions, that would be really helpful for us. Let's see if we have any more questions that have come in. Is responsive design only available on 7? No, so responsive designs or responsive containers were actually introduced in version 5. So if you're currently working on version 6, you are able to use those responsive containers. Absolutely, great question. How is it to convert the built app from 6 to 7? That would just be upgrading your environment. And let's see if we have any other questions. Can decisions integrate with Python? Are there tools available for the data? Yes. So we do have a module that can ingest Python scripts, and we can also interact with other Python apps via REST if it is hosted via Flask. Thank you, Corey, for answering that. All right. Oops, I forgot to launch that poll that I said I was launching. Okay, it's actually launched now, I promise this time. All right, so as you guys are taking a couple moments to fill that out, I do want to mention, we have all kinds of other resources available. I'm sure, as you're eating dinner tonight, you're going to be thinking about Decisions mobile forms, as I often do. And a question's gonna come up in your head, and that's okay. You don't have to only ask questions on webinars. We have all kinds of channels for you to reach out to us. So you can always write us at sales@decisions.com. You can reach out to support@decisions.com and get those questions answered. Additionally, we do have a great documentation website where you can do some more digging into resources. And additionally, we do have all of our webinars recorded from the past. So feel free to check those out and get any more information on Decisions. And we just want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. From Chesapeake, Virginia, we are signing out.